Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for Monday, June 24th, 2019. Our first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Did anyone have any changes or additions? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes from the June 10th, 2019 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the minutes are approved. Employee recognition? That's not moved to next. The next thing on the agenda is the tab liaison reports. Mr. Dugan.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, General Manager Koistra, Director Thompson. First of all, may I thank you, Vice Chair and Chair, and Councilmember Fredson for reappointing me. I did it for the money. Although you folks do not do it. Oh my gosh, I would way too much work. There's only a few items that are coming to you from TAB this week, from the TAB session, and Mr. Barbeau, Joe Barbeau, the smart man in the room, will explain some of them. But we have two streamlined TIP amendments. One is for stormwater funding on I-35W project, and the other is for the addition of a bridge to the Highway 5 airport project. And what I thought I'd do is just go through what a streamlined TIP amendment is. Joe is here to back me up, and same as Nick, and correct me when I'm wrong. But a streamlined TIP amendment, as you know, the Transportation Improvement Plan, it only allows a streamline, that's a very, as it says, streamlined process, not going through the full hearing, when there's federal funding not for a program administered by TAB or the Met Council. So typically it's just from MnDOT. But the project must be consistent with the PPP, and the project cannot be regionally significant. I won't go into what that means, but it's similar to what you would think. Regionally significant would be, when it's not regionally significant, it means it's currently in the TIP, the TIP, but it's not changing scope or elements that affect air quality. There is a process for a TIP amendment, a streamlined TIP amendment, when the money is through the Met Council or TAB, but we'll go into that when a subject of that presents itself. In this case, just for your background, the money was all from MnDOT, and it was funded through the National Highway Performance Program, which does not go through TAB. And the bridges that were, the one bridge that was added to the Highway 5 project by the airport was done so for economies of scale. It seemed to make sense at the time, and the cost that we're able to eke out of it went down. That's why they did it. Okay. And then the other aspect of the other item from TAB was on the request by Scott County, Chair Barber's home county, to reclassify County Road 42 in sections as a principal arterial. There's talk of that, or there's reasons for that. I won't bore you with the details, except that but I did want to go through the functional classification system with you just briefly. The federal government demands to receive federal funds that states classify their roads as to what is their function. So before a road is designed, is what road speeds, what width, what access, intersection control. And to receive federal funds, you must be within these classifications. And typically it's principal arterials and minor arterials. Principal arterials are just what they sound like. Interstates, expressways, 4 lanes in, 2 lanes in each direction, median in the middle. And they carry about 50% of all traffic in the state, and 90% are owned by MnDOT. And these are for high speeds, longer distances, and minimal access points. And on functional classification, and Joe, help me with this if I'm wrong, local trips are less than 8 miles, and regional trips are obviously greater than 8 miles, and typically on a principal arterial. The minor arterials which, just as their name sounds, they're not quite as large, but they still carry high volume traffic, high speeds, count for 26% of all traffic in the state. And then the collector and local roads, which is primarily for land access, think of your neighborhood, and they comprise 80% of the traffic, but they are not eligible for federal funding. And the other part of this application from Scott County, and Chair Barbara can, since it's her home county, can expand more if she desires on the details. It is a county state aid highway, and that is a designation. The county state aid highway, as you probably know, is a designation based upon funding. Where does the funding come from? It comes from the County State Aid Fund administered by MnDOT, but also required by the Minnesota Constitution. And in that regard, it is a separate fund that is made up of revenue from the gas tax, the vehicle sales and registration tax. And so I always thought, frankly, that aid meant it was a supplement to the main highway system, but it's actually the funding mechanism from aid from the state. It is not a federal program. Okay. And lastly, I would like to bring you up to date on the 3 policy work group meetings that we've had. And Councilmember Cummings is on that task force as well, as Chair Barber is. And let's go back to maybe. There have been 3 main elements brought up. One is on roadways and whether the maximum federal request should be increased. But the most discussion has been on transit and equity. And in transit, it's been on, policy considerations. Each area has a different transit need. Should they compete against each other, or should all projects get some? How do transit providers decide what they select? We are a hub and spoke, but don't go very well between suburbs. Is there a way to remedy that? Is there an equity lens for transit? And then there's 2 separate considerations. One is for transit, increasing the federal maximum request to $10 million. The figure is not that important, but say you can get up to, versus setting aside, let's say, an ABRT program. The ABRTs are funded typically every solicitation, which is 2 years. That means there could be 4 cycles to complete one. And is it a better use of money? And of course, General Manager Quaster could speak to this much better than I, to get it all at once. So those were the considerations. More discussion to come. And in the equity classification, it really is, what is equity? We have a Thrive 2040 definition, we have a TAB definition, and there's some others floating around. And for the regional solicitation, which as you know is the every 2-year allocation of the federal funds allocation to locally initiated projects of regional significance. The question is, we look at low-income populations, communities of color, children, and people with disabilities, and there was a lot of discussion on the elderly. How do we classify them in terms of equity? And then, how do we meet these needs? And certainly one of the thoughts that came out of it was we need to identify with the communities and find out from them what they need in terms of equity, because it can be very different for each community, and sitting away from it or 10,000 feet, you may not see it. And the real key that came out of it is how can we use, what is the role of equity in regional solicitation, and how important a role should it be, and in each of the applications, what percentage or what percentage of points will it gain, or garner, I should say. And we will continue this discussion at our next meeting. Madam Chair, thank you. Are there any questions? I'm sorry, I didn't ask that first.
Any questions for Mr. Dugan?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we're on to other reports. We've got MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair and members, just a few quick updates. This week we will be another part of the chair's tours of the local governments going to Anoka County. A lot of the projects that they're going to give a tour of are ones that were funded through regional solicitation projects, or ones that they'll be pursuing through regional solicitation, or other needs. But it's a really highway focused project. There's tremendous amount of investment that is actually planned and funded for the Anoka County area. You'll see some of the major projects later tonight when you see the tip, but some of those major projects they're going to show off this week. I think that might be our last scheduled one for a while, but for those that are attending, you'll see some good projects that had council involvement. The other thing, just to let you know, like each of our Transaway projects, that has usually some sort of policymaking body, like Southwest LRT does, Rush Line, Gold Line, Riverview's about to start one this year. The major highway projects that are typically led by MnDOT also have policy advisory committees, and there's, I think, 4 of them that will either restart or get started this year. And our approach is always that we give a briefing to the council members that the project goes through, and often it's more than one council member district, and then we make some decisions about who's going to represent the council on those policymaker committees. So we have just the 94 between the downtowns that we're expecting a policymaker group sometime this year. 494 in the Bloomington Strip between the airport and 169. We're expecting MnDOT to have a group later this year. 252 and 94 is one that has started actually with Hennepin County, has continued, and now they're going to have another meeting soon, so we'll be doing briefings since we have new representatives there. And then we're expecting a 35W project between downtown Minneapolis and Roseville. Those are just 4 major projects, so that we're expecting some activity to begin later this summer. So if that's any of those are within your district, we'll be setting up a briefing and background and discussion about what sort of role. But they're typically led by MnDOT policymaker groups, then also include the council. Any city that those projects go through in counties, and often like the transit ones, they might involve businesses and affected parties in those. So those groups haven't been meeting since you've started, but they're about to start, so just giving you a heads up. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Director Thompson? Councilman Brisner.
Thank you, Chair. What are the details
Hudson,
for
sorry.
Thursday's Anoka County tour?
It begins at 9, and it's scheduled for 3 hours of a tour starting at the Government Center. I don't know if they anticipate to go the whole time or not, but there's multiple sites that they're visiting, so I could expect they would take. I assume there's a bus that is going from the Government Center at 9.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Just wondering then, is like the 494 Corridor Coalition separate from the MnDOT and the 35W Alliance? Those are separate groups?
Madam Chair, Councilman, yes, but they're very overlapped, and often they try to have, like 494, they try to have those at the same day, often as the coalition groups, but they are often separate, but the membership is very overlapped. And so I think like 35W group has been involved in Orange Line and some of the projects, but there also been some of those members are on 494. But anytime there's a project, we do set those up, try to set them up as separate from any coalitions that are doing things like lobbying and others, but the membership is often the same.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? General Manager Cloister.
Sure. Council members, Chair. I'm just going to mention a few things. That first of all, the 2 weeks after the launch of the Metro C line, we're seeing a lot of ridership on that line. The last report I received is that already there's 11% more ridership along the line than we had prior. We'll wait a few more days, maybe a month or two, to get a real good feel about the ridership patterns, but it's a wonderful change for that corridor, and we expect it to perform strongly. I want to thank you again, those of you that attended the C line opening event, had a lot of energy in it. I'm still struck by the fact that this all started in 2012. So communities, policymakers, staff of all, 7 years of work went into opening this line. We're hoping we can open some future lines a little quicker than that. But it's always a struggle to scratch for the funding that you need to get those things started. And I think having a second line in addition to the A line showing the performance that we expect will certainly be a good advocate for the next line to come. I also want to mention that downtown construction continues to have a negative impact on transit. We had a really, I will say, a really difficult week last week, and we heard we had a really difficult week last week, and we're listening to those. And we've been working with the city of Minneapolis to work out maybe some better ways of managing traffic lights to give transit priority and have more assistance, traffic assistance in the right place. It was reported this morning that Friday went much better, but they qualified that, and Fridays is always a low traffic day. So we want to see, but last week, Monday through Thursday, was extremely difficult, and it was extremely poor experience for our operators and our riders especially. And I want to acknowledge that with you and tell you that we're working with the city of Minneapolis, and I'm told that they're working cooperatively with us to try to make the corrections we need to make this work. But it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. Also, some of you were at the Metro Transit Police Department academy graduation of 15 new recruits. It's another diverse group of recruits. It's always a great event to go to. Their families are invited. You can see the pride in both the recruits and with their families. These officers, three of the recruits previously served as community service officers for Metro Transit, which is how we purposed that program. And many of the officers have second language skills, including American Sign Language, Amharic, French, Hmong, Korean, and Vietnamese. So we're continuing to prioritize diversity in our recruitments and strong language skills in our recruitments. And I know Chair Barber was there, and Councilmember Cummings was there, and Councilmember Sterner were there, and it's a great event to attend if you can in the future. Also mentioned that we helped in the celebration of Pride this weekend. We had a bus in the parade. We had marchers in the parade. We had a booth there. We provided free rides on one of the days. I can't recall whether it was on Saturday or Sunday, but it had the value of about a $40,000 sponsorship for Pride, and so we were all in this year in terms of the Pride celebration, and received some appreciation for that. And then lastly, I'll mention that on June 26th marks the 15th anniversary of Blue Line, and actually this year marks the 15th anniversary of Blue Line, the 10th anniversary of North Star, and the 5th anniversary of Green Line. So there's a lot of notable dates in this. And since the opening of Blue Line, our first LRT, 216 million combined rides in light rail and commuter rail since that opening. The Green Line, Blue Line continue to set annual ridership records. 32% of our total rides are on rail lines, and we have 62 miles of combined railway, 91 light rail vehicles, all to say that it's become, since the beginning of Blue Line, rail has become a major contributor to the transit services in this region. So think about that on the 26th, and that's the end of my report.
Any questions for General Manager? Councilmember Atlas and Robertson.
Thank you. One question I have is around the C line, and at intersections where there's major connectivity, it like really stands out if there aren't stops or the enhancements. I'll give you an example at the intersection of Golden Valley Road and Penn, where there's maybe not as much of a major intersection as there is on Broadway and Penn, but along the corridor, there's just a missing of benches of any type.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious if there's plans of building out the supportive infrastructure at major intersections along the C line, or is all of that done, that investment done in that area at this point?
Madam Chair, Council Member, I'll take that back in terms of our capital improvement program and get back to you. I know that in terms of this the station development for C line, that's in place. Yeah. I know we're doing other station improvements, and I'm not sure where what you're mentioning fits into those at this point. But we're doing other station and stop improvements throughout the region. And I can ask this specific question about some of those major intersections that you're talking about that are not part of the C-line station infrastructure and whether there are plans for that as well. And we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zarin.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to ask a question around, anytime we bring in new technology, there's a little bit of a learning curve with that. And with the C-line and going all electric, I would like to know, get a report on how the operation of the new all electric buses have been going. Have we had any issues there? And what kind of learning curve have we gone through?
Sure. Chair Barber and council member, I can tell you what I've been told so far, and I'm sure they're still working on some things. We have had a couple of issues with chargers overheating or tripping fuses in our Haywood garage facility, and we've had both Siemens and New Flyer. Siemens, our contractors with New Flyer, but the chargers are provided through New Flyer from Siemens, and they've had technicians out trying to help us through those challenges. I can't tell you exactly the technical things they were doing, but I know that there are some growing pains in being in the front edge of this technology, and we're working through those. We can maybe in some time give you a full report on what we've experienced throughout. And I'm saying maybe in a month or two, because maybe we'll have had all the experience, hopefully all the major experiences we're going to have at the beginning of this. But we've been able through it all to still provide the electric bus service and still meet our requirements. But we've had some nights where people were working pretty hard to make sure the chargers got back into the place they needed to be before the service, before the buses need to be charged for the services to begin. So you're exactly right. It's new technology and it creates challenges for us.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sterner.
I just was going to add, I was at the Pride Parade and it was really well received. Really enthusiastic staff and their families were great. The bus was full and the crowd was really pleased with Metro Transit and a lot of affirmation. And the mascot Skip Traffic just really got a lot of high fives and they really enjoyed them. So Sarah, I thought, did a great job of really engaging the staff in that. So I was pleased to be part of it.
Thank you. I'll pass that along. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for General Manager question? Just a quick comment. I do like the idea of a follow-up presentation about the electrification because we are looking at building that into new purchases and things going forward. And that would be something we want to hear about on a sort of a routine basis over the first year so we can make sure we're incorporating the right ideas as we expand. Mr. Dugan.
Thank you, Chair. I omitted one item. The PCA is doing its final public listening session for the VW settlement. How that money is going to be spent. Councilmember Sterner, this Tuesday, I believe, tomorrow night, I'm sorry, at the Burnsville Library.
Oh, Bridger Library, okay, right down the corner.
I'm sorry, sir?
It's right down the corner, so be there, be square, I think, so.
You're everywhere in
All right.
Dakota County.
Okay.
All right, so
Thank you, Chair.
any other questions? All right, and then we will move on to our business. Our first item of business is our consent agenda. We have 2 items on consent. Did anyone want to make a motion to approve the consent items?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those nay, and the consent agenda is adopted. So our first item of business tonight is item 2019-145, North Star Corridor Funding Agreement with State of Minnesota Department of Transportation, and Ed Petrie. Welcome, Mr. Petrie.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Ed Petrie, I'm Director of Finance, once again with Metro Transit. I am here to present business item 2019-145. It's the North Star Corridor Funding Agreement with MnDOT and the attached resolution. The business item, the proposed action this evening would be that the Metropolitan Council would authorize the regional administrator to enter into an agreement with the State of Minnesota Department of Transportation for calendar years 20 and 21 to provide funding for the commuter rail service in Sherburne County for an amount up to $1.6 million per year, and then execute the attached resolution from the Metropolitan Council authorizing us to enter into the agreement with MnDOT. The first thing I will say is this is a standard operating procedure. You will actually see me over the next couple of months come forward before you with a number of operating agreements. The subsidy agreements, we have a number of subsidy agreements with the light rails, the Metro Blue Line, Metro Green Line, and North Star. Various agreements that we have with Hennepin County, Ramsey County, Anoka County, Sherburne County, and with MnDOT. So over the next couple months, I will be bringing forward various operating agreements for the operating subsidy for the annual grants. The North Star agreement is one with this one is with MnDOT. North Star, compared to a lot of our other operating grant agreements, most of the operating grant agreements they're split 50% from the state and then 50% from the counties, which would be, for example, like on the Metro Blue Line, 50% from the state, 50% from Hennepin County. North Star is a little different animal than the rest of them because we have service that's inside of the metro area, and then you have Sherburne County service. So I always do, this is kind of like a little math exercise when we talk about the funding for MnDOT, or for North Star. North Star is funded within within the 7-county metro area. 41.95% of the subsidy comes from the state or the council. 41.95% comes from the counties of Hennepin and Anoka. That is split basically 81.4% from Anoka and 18.6% from Hennepin. They share it based upon their area within the 7-county metro area. So that adds up to your the 41.95 plus the 41.95. You're still left with 16.1% left. That then is outside of the transit taxing district. That's in Sherburne County. The Sherburne County piece then is then broken in between state and the county. 8.05% of it comes from Sherburne County, just like you do have the Hennepin and the Anoka piece. So Sherburne County picks up 8.05% of the subsidy, and then Greater Minnesota MnDOT picks up the state portion, 8.05% of the subsidy. If you add all that together, you come up with 100% of the subsidy. The agreement this evening would be for entering into the agreements for calendar years 20 and 21 with MnDOT for their 8.05% of the subsidy for North Star Commuter Rail. And with that, Chair, committee members, this is a standard agreement. Once again, I will come forward before you over the next couple months with the balance of the agreements for the Metro Blue Line and then also for North Star with the other counties. With that, Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for the presenter? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and item carries.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
you, Ed.
And appreciate the math exercise. Thank you.
All right, next up, we have business item 2019-154, which is the Scott County Functional Classification Principal Arterial Change Request. We have Steve Peterson. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members. Mr. Dugan gave a good overview of functional classification, so he's well versed in the topic. Not many people are. It's a very highly technical topic, and we don't often bring this to the council. In fact, principal arterial changes only come to the council about once every decade, so this is a new experience for many of us. But in 2 months' time, we'll have our second principal arterial request from Dakota County that you'll be seeing in the September timeframe. So this is the first of two that you'll see in the next 3 months here. As Mr. Dugan mentioned, principal arterials are really the high-speed mobility function of our roadway system. And I put a few pictures on here. I'm a very visual person, so I put a number of pictures throughout this presentation, giving examples of, here's Highway 169 Jordan and 494 in Ridgefield and Bloomington. That's examples of what principal arterials really mean to the system and the roadway system. The council was designated by the state to maintain or designate the principal arterial system, so that's why it comes to you. A lot of the lower functional classifications on the previous slide are brought down, and they're done more at the technical level with our TAC planning and TAC groups, but the principal arterials, again, that fosters a change to the long-range plan, the TPP, and so that's why it goes all the way to the council. A few of the impacts of principal arterial, and this is why we did ask for resolutions of support from impacted agencies. And in this case, there's 5 resolutions of support that were given for the Scott County request. That's because as you have higher speed roadways, that does have impact on the amount of access from both public streets and then driveways onto the system. as well as the setbacks and other things that do impact businesses and residents living along the corridor. So we wanted to make sure we did our due diligence here and did get those resolutions of support to make sure everybody was aware of what these changes could imply if approved. So the 4 roadways in question, we have a few maps here to kind of show you that. So northern part of Scott County in the Shakopee area, Prior Lake. 4 separate requests, again, that were made. 3 of them are upgrading from a minor arterial to a principal arterial, and the last one is downgrading an existing principal arterial back down to that a minor arterial functional classification. So we'll spend most of our time on one segment, but just to give you an idea, so this is Highway 42. A lot of people, this is the east-west roadway going through Dakota and Scott County. Many people have traveled it. So this is the first segment that's being proposed for upgrading. You can take a look at some of the photos. This is a 4-lane roadway, 2 lanes in each direction. There's a median, either grass or concrete median. Usually signalized intersections, a lot of turn lanes, and this is really meant to facilitate, again, longer distance travels, higher speeds, so people can get around the metro area and beyond. Second one, CASA 17, again, another a 4-lane roadway. Staff, from a technical standpoint, thought, again, this was deserving of the principal arterial designation. The third segment is CASA 78, and this is where we had most of the discussion, and we are not recommending at this time, and TAB's not recommending at this time to upgrade to a principal arterial. As you can see, the pictures are quite different than the last few slides. This is a 2-lane roadway, relatively low traffic volumes on it. A lot of direct access from either farm fields or driveways, as you can see in the pictures. So not really facilitating those kind of higher speeds, the longer distance trips throughout the metro area. This is on the future principal arterial network map, and people that know this area, particularly on the far west side, they're redoing the whole interchange area of Highway 41 and 169 on a huge Tiger grant, multi-million-dollar project. And so in the future, this area could facilitate longer distance trips and more traffic volumes. But at this time, our job from a technical standpoint is to say, what is the current function of the roadway? Is it acting today as a principal arterial, or is it something more in the future that this body should consider? Here's the downgrade from a principal arterial to an A minor arterial. Again, this is primarily for spacing reasons. So we thought this was a good change. In the existing long-range plan, the TPP, we do have this shown as a conditional change with Scott County. So we did have a lot of conversations with Scott County about 3 of these 4 changes, and we did put it in the long-range plan. So it's currently in the TPP as pending formal action by the council. So again, 3 of the 4 were recommended for approval. The last one, CASA 78, because of a lot of the direct land access from driveways and farm fields, low volume. We said this needs a little bit more study, and we'll see if the new interchange, once it's built, if it does kind of change the outlook and the development in the general area. That's shown in the proposed action, Madam Chair, that we have the 4 separate parts to that. We tried to separate what was being proposed as approval versus continuing to look at that one CASA 78, County Road 78. The input that we received, so we brought this all the way from TAC planning to TAC and the TAB, and they were in general in agreement with the staff recommendation. A few kind of more policy level things that we did want to bring to you is that, that as the area is changing quickly, it is helpful to be on the principal arterial network map. So as developers are developing the land and they want to have direct access for their customers, showing a roadway as a principal arterial and with having less access is helpful to local agencies, whether it be Scott County or cities or Dakota County, as you'll see in 2 months. So we think one good compromise is that we add language to the transportation policy plan that does indicate that this is a future principal arterial. So Scott County would have some semblance of this being in a documented regional document that we're studying this as a future principal arterial, and that should help with some of the access control along the corridor as it does develop. Then lastly, the last bullet point we did want to mention is typically principal arterial planning has been a MnDOT function, but as MnDOT has said, we can't really absorb new roadways or taking on additional roadways from cities or counties for the most part. That planning, as our metro area has expanded, has really shifted to the counties. So a lot of the counties, which is kind of a rare form, is that they are starting to plan for what are some of the high-speed roadways they need to have to facilitate movements across their county and across the region. And so, Dakota County just did an effort, a big study effort, where they looked at potential principal arterials, and Washington and Oka. So all the kind of collar counties, I would say, are starting to think about some of the major roadways and growth on their system. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it back to you and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm sitting kind of a weird spot here with the mic. So I'm not sure if I missed it, but as far as going to an upgrading to a principal arterial, what kind of studies are done? I mean, to show that, the speeds need to be higher, or people are traveling longer distances, and how long do those studies take?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council Member. So we have in the Appendix D of the Transportation Policy Plan, which I'm sure few people have read, we have a detailed table on what are the characteristics that we're looking for a principal arterial, and those largely come from the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA. So as far as planning of future principal arterials, that guidance from the federal government is really what was Dakota County, for instance, used when they started looking at different options for a principal arterial. So that's the study that they did was maybe a 12 or 18 month study, Dakota County that is, but Scott County has been planning for east-west movements really for a decade or more. And it's been in several of their long-range plans that they've been thinking about trying to facilitate these higher speed county-to-county movements.
Okay.
That answers your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any additional questions? Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair. I just had kind of a question regarding just maybe in general, but I was kind of like privy to a situation in Dakota County, so in Scott, where you have like Elko New Market, and there's a road going over there. But so Scott County, it looks like there's just a couple farms on it, but it's a pass through in Dakota County. It's a really busy road. So when you look at these projects, are you involving both counties, or you look at the big picture on it for traffic, even if one side's not developed and the other side is quite developed?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council Member. So in the case of Scott and Dakota counties, both have been at the table for, they've done numerous studies, both of them, and they are sure to include the other because they know some people aren't just traveling in one or the other. They want to make that whole trip all the way from sometimes 169 all the way up the far eastern side of Dakota County. So some good cooperation, I think, from our local partners on the southern half of the metro here.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just trying to also understand sort of the process. So if the studies go on for 12 months, 18 months, however long it takes. So then when you bring the action to us, it's these studies have come to a conclusion and these are your recommendations. So is this something that, say, annually you will bring, we've come through our studies and this is where we are on this project or that project, or how does that work?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council Member. So these are, like I said before, this is generally a once in a decade activity, so it doesn't happen too often, and I don't expect it to happen too often. Studies are ongoing, and there isn't probably an annual update process that you'll see at the council for new principal arterials. You don't want to add too many across the network. There's kind of a right sizing of the system too. So it won't be an annual update process. I don't know, Director Thompson, if he has anything.
Director Thompson.
And Madam Chair and members, so on this one, once they got to the point they felt they were ready to ask, they formally asked the council. They submitted an application and a document that went through TAB. So that's what kind of triggered the action tonight. They came through the studies and they decided they were ready, and they did a formal request for this change. And so we have a series of information required in that, but it's the local agency in this place that takes that step to get it in motion once the studies. But we were, they involved staff throughout the process, so it wasn't a surprise that those coming. But there's some official steps that we have in this before it comes before you.
Paula?
Thank you. So I guess I was wondering with MnDOT kind of stepping back, if that will increase the activity that you're doing now, more than once a decade.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember. It very well could. And the fact that you'll have 2 within the 6-month time period may encourage others to do either planning work or just submit requests.
Madam Chair, there's also, the counties now are starting to invest their sales tax, which is fairly new to the funding picture, having some revenue to do upgrades to their roads, and so that could also trigger changes too. And they're often investing in MnDOT highways too with that sales tax. But I mean, there's not going to be a flood of them.
Right.
There's just a few, that could advance quicker than maybe in the past. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just want to make sure I'm tracking correctly. As that there aren't unique studies that are going on to consider these things, that it's more the annual work that a community does to do counts, measurements, and planning, at some point trip the federal rubric for what qualifies as this kind of a facility. I just want to make sure that I have the correct understanding. So there aren't unique studies that you'll choose to do from one period of time because you're looking at this particular road. You're doing your regular types of monitoring and counting of traffic flow and utilization and growth. And then once you trip those state or federal rubrics that indicate what type of a facility it is, then you can qualify.
Madam Chair, I think it's more actually the comprehensive planning process done at city and county level. So they're thinking 20 years ahead and thinking about whatever it'd be a county or city, what transportation network do we want? And for a project like this probably started more than a decade ago in the county, thinking through 20 years ahead, which is a requirement that we're saying we need to plan long term. And that got them thinking about where should our network be. And then as development occurs, eventually gets to the point where they can anticipate that this will probably start to meet some thresholds in 5 years. Let's do a plan for budget for a study that does this analysis.
Okay.
But really it's that long-term planning that is the starting point, rather than just general traffic increasing and we've tripped the trigger. They're thinking about this in the long term of what they want for their area.
And if I might just add to it, just one, I think that as these counties have been doing their own sales tax, they also had to, as part of that process, pick projects. And so it's helped them look at where they want to spend money and where they want to investigate and do studies and in that type of thing to kind of feed into the regional system and the transportation policy plan. Councilmember Atlas.
So it's a regular part of the planning and business of a community. It's not a specific, unique thing to this particular request. That's what I was.
Madam Chair, I would say the regular planning has led to this.
Yep, perfect.
A specific study that came to this request, but yes, it's the regular planning that is the foundation of this.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Sterner.
All right, thanks. I mean, I got the reason why we're downgrading the County Road 21, but I'm just wondering, do we feel there'll be any opposition or like, what are you thinking? And, the people going out, or is that something that kind of think Scott County is supportive of that?
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. So Scott County put the request in themselves actually to downgrade that roadway. And part of the reason why, let's see if I have a map on here that might show it better. So County Road 21, as they were doing their long range planning, they've done a fine job of doing some system planning here. But as you look further south from County Road 21, you run into Prior Lake. So it doesn't facilitate those north-south movements like they would like. So that's why they're shifting it to the west to this County Road 17 Marshall Road. Because if you draw a line north-south at County Road 17, there's a route that you can take to get you all the way to the southern Scott County border. So the long-term prospects for a north-south Principal Arterial make more sense to shift it over to 17. So that was on their own merit or their own request that they wanted this downgrade.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I just being a Shakopee resident, it doesn't change Highway 21, which has been redone and functions very well, but it's more of a local route at this point. And I think that's how people use it, so it actually makes a lot of sense. Any other questions from council members? All right, if not, then I will entertain a motion to approve item 2019-154.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the action item carries. Thank you, Steve. All right, we are on to our last business item. It's item 2019-160, execute authorization of contract options with Gillig. We have Paul Colton. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. I'm Paul Colton, Fleet Manager for MTS. And this afternoon I have for you business item 2019-160, which is the following proposed action to have the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to exercise bus purchase options utilizing the Commonwealth of Virginia's contract E-194-75548 MA2274 with Gillig LLC to purchase 9 replacement transit buses and 2 expansion buses in an amount not to exceed $5,951,000. The rationale for this purchase is the 9 buses will be coming to the end of their useful life in December of this year. So we want to make sure that we get those replaced for MBTA and our customers. The 2 expansion buses will service the Cedar Avenue corridor, according to the MBTA staff, and we will be providing expansion service to the University of Minnesota. The purchase of these buses is in the approved capital plan, and we'll use federal funds and local funds. The MBTA replacement bus project was approved by the council as part of the 2018 third quarter amendment and is in a federal grant. The 2 expansion buses are in an old CMAQ congestion mitigation air quality grant. We've now found a purpose and a use for those buses within that corridor, and so we will move forward with utilizing that grant, and that will help us close out that grant once we purchase those buses. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have regarding this project.
All right, any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What happens with buses when they reach the end of their useful life?
So there's a couple of things that can happen. In some instances, we come up to the state fair, and so we hold back some of those buses so that we can provide state fair service, and then we will sell those in a public auction. Or if we don't have a need for them for state fair or some other holdback reason, we just sell them in state auctions. So anybody from anywhere can buy our buses and figure out how they want to use them.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Sterner?
This was, thank you, Chair. I was wondering what the fuel type of these buses will be, and then are they gaining efficiency? How much efficiency versus the bus that they're replacing?
Yeah, so the buses they're replacing are going to be 12 or 13 years old. So that's probably three EPA engine changes on the diesel side ago. So what I would anticipate that we would probably see from that model in 20 that we have, I think these are 2006 model that we're replacing, I would anticipate that we would see 15 to 20% improvement in fuel economy since that particular engine model. But I think the bigger thing is that we're going to see a lot bigger pollution savings than we did on that older model.
Councilmember Sterner?
So were electric buses considered for replacement on these?
They were not, partly from when we did the budget for these, we budgeted diesel operated buses, and finding a electric bus contract to buy off of it this time, was not able to find anything that was available.
Director Thompson?
Chair members, I think like the suburban providers are kind of watching Metro Transit's deployment of the electric bus fleet and learning from that and trying to understand where in their service model electric buses would fit. And I don't believe MVTA at this point has a plan for that yet, but we'll continue to share our learnings from what we're doing on C-Line and others, but then also work with them to see if they want to plan for electrification in the future.
And I would just add, we do have a plan to roll out in Metro Transit over time, electric buses, and we can come back and present some more on that. And that will make sense of how we're doing that, so you get some background for it. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I'm wondering what, I know fully electric is really a new thing, but hybrids not so much. Is that still not an option as well?
Council member, Chair. The hybrid version is they still are making those at Gillig. MVTA and the council, as we discussed this, did not really consider that as an option. Partly, you gain a little bit of fuel savings and so forth on the hybrid. You might increase by 25% your fuel economy, but the cost of the capital equipment is almost double. So at this point, we elected to continue from a budgeting perspective to go down the path of the current technology.
Director Thompson.
And Madam Chair, members, so we council provides the fleet to the suburban providers, but we do allow them to make the decisions on their fleet type. But we provide them a generally penalized budget.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to expand that budget, they maybe would consider some other options, but within the number of buses they needed in the budget that was available and what they're used to using, and they felt that this met their needs in this situation.
Just a follow-up, it would be interesting to hear, because I know that there's gas mileage, but then what I might have inferred in what you were sharing was that there was additional pollution savings.
Yeah. Yes.
So that would be just helpful to hear what that is, because I think we all make assumptions.
Sure.
That
right. Council member, Chair, the one of the requirements from the EPA and the Federal Transit Administration has been on the diesel side to really, they've got these requirements about every 3 years for new diesel technology that improves the reducing the pollution, particulate matter, and the gases that are released. So those will continue on the diesel side, but I agree with Director Thompson in that, as we continue to develop budgets, work with the suburban providers and get information from Metro Transit, how can we reshape the fuel types that we're able to use here in the Twin Cities?
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, members, I think we do, there's an annual report to this committee about the emissions reduction on the fleet, and I bet the last one we had was before you started. And so we can share that one, but that really shows over time the emissions of the new technology and how that's changed and what overall the fleet has been. That studies more about Metro Transit, but you can see that applies because these suburban providers are buying same type of fleet. And so we'll share that with you, but I anticipate that will be coming before this committee because it's an annual update that is given to this committee about the facilities and the fleet and how it's been improving. And there's been fairly dramatic changes in emissions for the positive in the fleet, and especially when you're replacing buses every 12 to 14 years, you think about that new bus is dramatically better than what it's replacing in terms of emissions.
Councilmember Atlas.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're in the Community Development Committee have been addressing how we can be not just in compliance with our own goals around addressing climate change and building more resilient communities, but also looking at what are we doing now. And so it's just helpful to have that kind of information. We're going to be over the next couple of months working to build a resolution around our goals to be proactive in addressing that. So any information that we can have around decisions that are being made, whether directly for us or ways that we're assisting our other partner communities as well, would be helpful.
To that, I will relay the message to General Manager Quisher, who had to leave a little early today, about some of the different things that we are actively doing within Metro Transit. And so we'll take one of the nights for our information items. We focused on that topic related to climate change, so you can have some of that background. And then when we get these annual reports, you can have some context for the data. Any council members, Turner?
Well, thank you, Chair. I just had another question. I don't mean to be a dead horse here, but since these buses are going to be around for 14 years, can they use biodiesel or can they be converted to use biodiesel at a nominal cost?
Chair, council member. Yes, these buses can use biodiesel, and they are. I think we use 5% biodiesel, 5 or 10% during most of the year. It's only during the really extreme cold winter months that we reduce that biodiesel content. So we are using biodiesel during most of the year.
Okay, but not 100%, but 5 to 10% at the most, probably.
Yeah, yep. Whatever the engine manufacturer Cummins allows us to use.
Okay.
Yep.
Additional questions for the presenter? All right, if not, then I'd entertain a motion to approve 2019-160.
So moved.
The second, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we are on to, we have to determine consent items. I think that all items can go to consent unless anyone disagrees with that. All right, everything will go to consent. See, didn't even agree. All right, for information, our first information item is a conversation about the Draft Transportation Improvement Program. We have Joe Barbeau and Sarah Maskey here to speak. Welcome.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I believe I have the distinction of presenting your first ever item, and I believe it was in a TIP amendment. So I did get into a little bit what the Transportation Improvement Program is. This is a presentation we shared a couple of years ago at the Transportation Committee. We don't do it every year, but we certainly thought it made a lot of sense this time, given that most of the members are new. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the TIP is and what kind of projects is in there. And Sarah, during the course of this, we'll talk about public involvement related to the TIP. So the TIP, I believe I actually have this slide, but the TIP is a 4-year list of transportation projects funded in whole or in part with federal funding, and it's required of all metropolitan planning organizations in the country. And it has to include any projects funded with federal funds or that are considered regionally significant, which is a term that Peter Dugan brought up earlier, related to air quality and our role as a transportation air quality maintenance area. And that bottom bullet indicates that the TIP is rolled into the MnDOT statewide transportation improvement program. It's reflected verbatim, and in order to get underway, a project must be in the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. So here's an example of, or some examples of the projects that are in the TIP. Transit projects that are transit providers program with FTA formula funds. Roadway projects program by MnDOT makes up probably the majority of the projects in there. The regional solicitation projects that go through our TAB process that I'm sure you've heard a lot about by now. And then our MPO area actually does include a small piece of Wisconsin just on the other side of the bridge in Stillwater. There actually are no projects in the TIP this time around, and the draft TIP this time around. There have been in past years in that area. And then a couple of small portions of Wright and Sherburne counties where we usually get about 10 projects per year. So those are the projects that are included in the TIP. Council approval will be for all of these projects. And that statement is there to clear up some confusion that some TAB members and council members have had in the past. These are not just for those regional solicitation projects that you hear most about, but it is for the entire program. So here's where we're at for the schedule for this draft TIP. TAB approved the TIP for public review last week on Wednesday. The public review period started today, and so it's out for public review for the next 45 days. That ends on August 9th. And August 21st, TAB will consider comments made by the public and will approve the TIP. And then it'll go through Transportation Committee and be back at Council on September 25th. At that point, MnDOT approves the TIP for public review. MnDOT approves the TIP and passes it on to the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration as part of the STIP. And usually those federal bodies approve the TIP around November 1st. So usually it's about 4 months into the fiscal year where we finally get a TIP approved. That's been the normal process. So now Sarah's going to talk a little bit about the public review process.
So as Joe mentioned, it was released for public comment last week. And our typical approach with the TIP is we we use all of our channels that we have available. So email, web posting, social media. I believe I forgot the Star Tribune ad on the slide, but we do a Star Tribune ad every time we do a public comment period. And then we really rely also on our partners, our local partners. Obviously, these are a lot of local projects to help us promote that with their populations. And this time I'm excited that we're going to host 2 public pop-up meetings. We're going to go to a location where there's a lot of people that gather, and actually has a project in this tip. So it's the Stone Arch Bridge. And we're going to go there on 2 different time periods, one on a weekend directly after the farmer's market, and then one on a weeknight so we can catch commuters as they go over the project. As you probably know, this is a huge list of projects, so trying to make sure that we're hitting a place where we know that there's a lot of people across the region that come to that location. So that's our basic approach. If you have any questions.
So this draft transportation improvement program looks like it's going to be for about a $5 billion program for 4 years, which is a little bit higher than we've had in the past. And I think one of the reasons for that is the Corridors of Commerce projects that were awarded, I want to say about a year ago. And you'll see that second one, US 169 in Elk River, that's actually in, I should know, that's either Wright or Sherburne County, Wright County. And that's a good example of a project that's in that part of our region that has to be in the tip. So usually we get a handful of projects for a smaller amount of money in Wright and Sherburne County. This will hands down be the record for Wright and Sherburne County with $157 million project right here. So we had about 4 of those projects awarded, and these projects are all in the tip, in the draft tip, and will be in the final tip. And they're all large projects. And here's the what we consider major transit projects that you'll see in the draft tip. We have the Metro Orange Line, which is bus rapid transit to Burnsville for $150 million. The D Line, Chicago Fremont Avenue, Southwest LRT extension, and Botno extension, of course, Blue and Green Line extensions to Eden Prairie and Brooklyn Park, respectively. And some major highway projects. These are projects that we found that are probably in the range of $50 million or more for the most part. A lot of projects on Highway Interstate 35W, MnPass type projects, bridge projects. We have 2 slides for these. I'm not going to name them all by name. And interchange projects, those are the kind of projects that tend to be major projects that we do over the course of a transportation program. And we have these major set-asides listed on the PowerPoint. And Nick, I believe, Mr. Thompson, I believe you're going to talk about those.
Yes, I can. Madam Chair, members, this is generally your tip should describe all your projects, but there are some, it should be fiscally constrained and identify all the money that's in the region and what the projects are assigned to. This is a little bit unusual in that we have at least $129 million that's available for mobility projects, which are generally expansion type projects on the highway, be it a MnPass lane, a major interchange, or a general purpose lane, that are not currently assigned to projects. But we do know that revenue is coming to the region in this 4-year time frame. In general, our planning process had tied these to 2 projects. Number one, some of the money for the Rethinking I-94 project between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And then 35W MnPass between Roseville and downtown Minneapolis. Those projects are identified in our TPP, but they're both in a stage environmentally where the exact alternatives were not known, and MnDOT was not comfortable identifying those exactly in the tip at this point. So once those projects get identified with what they will be, we'll have tip amendments that kind of convert this money to the actual project. But we wanted to clearly kind of be clear, since we're going in a public process, that there is this money that's available. It will be assigned to projects. And even meetings like this, we're identifying there's some likely projects that it'll go to, but it just hasn't been programmed yet. So this is a little bit unusual to have this money unassigned for in this large amount of money, but the MnDOT, as the agency sponsor, didn't feel they were ready to assign those to projects yet. And so there's a public, if they get identified in the future, there'll be a public process for those two. They won't, we'll have a public, probably because they're major, there'd be a public hearing saying this is a tip amendment, taking comments about the specific project. So there'll still be a good public process for that money in the future.
Thanks, Treasurer Thompson. And that is the extent of this presentation.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Sterner.
Great, thank you, Chair. Mr. Barbeau, I was just wondering on, like the Botno extension, looks like it's a $1.5 billion, price on that. Is there any possibility of changing that to a BRT and allowing some of these other projects to come in so we could spread out the metro area with our budgeting?
Madam Chair, remember that's a little out of my element. I don't know if Mr. Thompson would have a response or if
Madam Chair, members.
We all have a
Right now, that money is identified for that project, and until for a light rail extension, until that project sponsors or community makes a change to that, this document represents where that funding and what the project is described as at this point. Should a decision come to change the mode, change anything like that, then we would update the tip to reflect whatever the local project or the project regional is. But at this point, that's where the decision is, and so we want the public to know that that's what the funding is identified for.
And currently the status is we have a preferred mode and a preferred alignment or this is the locally preferred alternative identified in the transportation policy plan. And so that's currently where the state is. So we want to make sure that the TIP and the TPP align and align with what it is the locally preferred alternative.
Okay, I had another one. So like when we're doing marketing, I know this is all pretty much West Metro, so we have the Star Tribune, but if it's East Metro or St. Paul, do we use the Pioneer Press as marketing in those cases?
We do use the Star Tribune to formally advertise. However, we do send out our message to all of the publications throughout the region, and typically we do get coverage on that. So it's not that we are excluding any particular, but we're spreading the word as wide as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any additional questions for the presenter? Council Atlas in person.
How have we been including other languages in some of this kind of work around educating or promoting what's happening?
It's a really good question. We at this point have not, but I will go back and take a look at that. We do have a translation available to us, so we can certainly look at using that on social media.
I also would just encourage, I think radio is an important venue too for many growing populations. So, and I think surprisingly enough, maybe to some, NPR is something that a lot of different communities listen to from across many ethnic groups. So.
Great. I will take a look at those as well.
Additional questions? Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. So Councilmember Sterner alluded to this, but this list in front of us does seem to be really heavy towards the West Metro, and I'm wondering if there's any comment on that.
bring to the list of projects.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chair, this is a list of major projects. There certainly are projects throughout the region in the Transportation Improvement Program. I'm not aware of any particular reason that there's major projects are slated towards West Metro.
Director Thompson.
Sure, Madam Chair, members. So there's I think 400 some projects in the TIP. Many of those are throughout the region. These are the 525 major projects. But the three major East Metro transit projects, Gold Line, Rush Line, and Riverview, that are queuing up are just outside of the TIP. So when they're in their phase of construction is beyond the time frame of this. So that's part of the reason for the transit, reason there isn't East Metro Transit in that list, but they're coming. And then on the highway project, one of the big one is the Rethinking I-94 and the fact that that's kind of moving around and pushing out. And a lot of the East Metro major highway projects have recently completed. I can think of St. Croix Bridge is one that in the past 5 years would have shown up but is done. 494, 94 out from here to Woodbury was in last year's tip, but is now completed. And so there's a little bit of timing on the major projects where it just seems to be in balance on West Metro. But if you were to think a broader tenure, I think there's some pretty good balance throughout the Metro. And about 4 years from now, when those major transit projects come, it's going to look like an East Metro transit balance at that point. So
those projects are in the transportation policy plan, which is the first step that kind of feeds into this next step.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions for the presenters? All right. Thank you all. All right. Next, we have a presentation on the Travel Behavior Inventory Program. We have Jonathan Ehrlich here.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members. I'm Jonathan Ehrlich. I lead the travel forecasting and travel data team at MTS. I'm going to talk to you about something which is really core to a lot of MTS's work and also a little bit arcane. So I am both excited for the opportunity and appreciate your forbearance of some of this. One of the basic tasks that the council as the MPO does, like all MPOs is to maintain a regional transportation forecasting model. There's a variety of federal programs that require it, and it's something that's universally done. It is a set of models that are used to forecast travel across the region, both on the highway and transit system. And it's something that the council over time has taken ownership of, and it is something that we both maintain, provide technical assistance for, and update. And we update it continuously. We update it to affect changes on the ground and in terms of development of transportation networks, both new facilities and new modes, changes in demographics, changes in travel behavior, changes in methods of travel analysis. Travel forecasting is a field that began in the 1950s with the development of both the invention of computers and the development of the interstate highway system. And computational methods, data methods have advanced tremendously since then. And the sorts of policy questions that we're dealing with have evolved substantially since then. In 1955, we were asking very basic questions about how many lanes the interstate system needed, and we're asking much more detailed and much more complex questions. And now I need to continually advance our methods to be able to meet the analytical needs for the questions that you and other policymakers are asking. So what do we do with this transportation model? What do we do with the regional model? Our primary stakeholders are at three levels. There's the council itself, both the council and Metro Transit. We use it for developing system level forecasts and performance measures for the transportation policy plan, for determining conformity of the transportation policy plan and TIP to the Clean Air Act, and for doing forecasting for major transit projects. MnDOT does the same thing on the highway system. They use it for system studies like the MnPass studies as an example, for particular corridor studies that precede any major highway project, and for specific highway project forecasts themselves for highway project design and for environmental analysis. And then local governments use our models for doing local highway project forecasts for county and city roads, for doing forecasts of development impact, major development impact forecasts, for transit forecasts for county-led transit projects. And several counties use our model as a base for developing more detailed models that they use for local level projects in Anoka, Dakota, Hennepin, and Washington, I believe, as well as Scott County, all have their own models, which are all based in some way on the Met Council's model. The model itself is a set of is a set of very data-intensive computational procedures that bring in information about travel behavior, about the transportation supply, the transportation network, and demographic information, apply statistical models to it, and from that develop facility-level forecasts for all sorts of transportation projects. But fundamental to how the model works is an estimate of travel behavior, which we collect through the travel behavior inventory, which answers questions about how people travel. How do they travel? By what modes? How far? From where? To where? For what purpose? Who are they traveling with? How do people and households interact? How does this vary demographically? How does it vary through parts of the region? And that is continually changing over time. One of the things that we saw between the decades between 1950 and 2000 was a steady increase of travel over time. VMT increased, travel per person increased across the board around 2010. And the last time we did the travel behavior inventory, we started noticing some critical travel behaviors changing in ways that didn't meet that trend. And so I want to talk about what our response has been to that. The travel behavior inventory itself is a set of surveys that we conduct primarily, and I'll talk about this in more detail later in the presentation, focused around a major household travel survey. Previously, between 1950 and 2010, we had done this approximately every 10 years to coincide or to immediately follow after the US Census. And it was done consistently every decade. After the 2010 travel behavior inventory, we started noticing some of these changes in travel behavior and travel behavior trends, and wanted to look at new directions for the TBI overall. The other thing that we noted is that both in 2000 and 2010, getting funding to do the TBI became a much more higher stakes effort than it had been in the past. And so wanted to think about more sustainable models for the TBI. So we conducted an evaluation of the entire program in 2015, which recommended a number of changes, which we began transitioning to in the past couple of years. One of those was, rather than to do a household travel survey every 10 years, we should do a household survey every 2 years, and then put that together as part of a continuing program that included other elements of the program, including a transit onboard survey, updates to the regional model, and to leverage the ability to purchase data from third-party commercial data providers when we could. And also to make use of technological changes to enable us to compensate for some of the shortcomings that we had known for years and decades of traditional survey methods. So what we got out of this change was an ability, primarily as a result of doing surveys more often, to respond to technological, social, and economic change more rapidly. It's not our desire to stand before you recommending policies and projects whose forecasts are based on data that, when we present them, is 8, 10, 12 years old. And so we're able to make recommendations and make forecasts that are based on newer data. We're able to track this to be able to understand what's happening without having to wait for a decade to see the results. All of this will result in us improving our traffic forecasting procedures, hopefully leading to better forecasts, better confidence in the forecasts, and better confidence in the forecasts both with us and with regional and national partners, which will make our projects more competitive. Ultimately, what we want to do is have better data, more frequent data, and more reliable and up-to-date data that allow us to make better decisions based on that data. And then going back to the funding situation, we wanted to be able to create a program that cost a relatively consistent amount of money from year to year and biennium to biennium. So we were creating a consistent budget request rather than a gigantic line item on a decennial basis that either would or wouldn't be funded. That allows us to plan the program, allows both easier budgeting and allows us to plan the program in a much more long-term way. So this is what the TBI data collection consists of. Every 2 years, starting now, we're in the midst of the middle of a 2-year cycle, we will do a household travel survey, which is a survey that I'll talk about in more detail later in this presentation, where we record travel from each member of a sample of households. And the primary mode of that data collection is a smartphone GPS that most participants in the survey carry with them for a week and answer targeted questions over the course of the days that they're part of the survey. Every 5 years, it's been our practice to do a transit onboard survey, which is a large origin destination survey that gives us origin and destination information along with demographic information on all passengers in the transit system. It's a survey that we conduct on the entire transit system every 5 years. We last did this in the fall of 2016, and we'll be doing it again in the fall of 2021. And there are other, similar to the transit system, there are other areas of travel and generators of travel which are hard to look at, which are hard to see from a general picture of travel, but lend themselves to very focused surveys. And we have budgeted for doing these every 2 to 3 years. We're planning to do a survey at the MSP airport in looking at mode of arrival at the airport next year. We'll be following that up with surveys at universities and colleges 2 years after that. And again, we also want to make sure that we're not collecting data that doesn't need to be collected, looking continuously at what data is out there from third-party providers. Where it's possible for us to purchase data for commercial providers, we do. Where it's possible to leverage that data, we make it to make our custom data collection more efficient. We do that as well. And then the general principle of all of the program is to share it with MnDOT, with counties, and with all of our local stakeholders to the extent that we're able to. So how do we pay for this? The overall program, including all of our surveys and all of our model updates, costs on average about $2.5 million every 2 years. This is more in some years, it's less in some years. There's a funding amount in the tip, which is actually for a little less than that in the 2023-2024 time period, just because of the ways that things line up. But the intent is for this to be on average every $2.5 million every 2 years, and this is split evenly between the 3 major stakeholders: the state, which is represented by a contribution of federal dollars from MnDOT, the region, which is represented by contributions from the council's budget, and then local, which is represented by an amount which comes from the Regional Solicitation. So there's program itself turns into a list of projects. We're at the very beginning of this change, and so much of the program itself is still in planning, or indeed many years away. But we are under contract. We have a contractor under contract for the first 3 waves: the 2018-19 Household Travel Survey, which is underway right now, the 2020-2021 Household Travel Survey, and the 22-2023 Household Travel Survey, which are all under contract. Everything else we're working on either planning or getting under contract soon. So that's the overall program, and now I want to talk in depth about the Household Travel Survey itself, which is underway now. So the Household Travel Survey, we got under contract in January of 2019, very soon after getting funding for it, and we began a pretest in May of 2018. In October of 2018, we began major data collection, which is underway right now. The overall schedule of this program is to do a year of data collection and then take a year off and then do another year. So we're going to be doing data collection until September 30th of this year. Then we'll take a year to both plan the next wave and do analysis and do some publishing of data from that. And then we will begin and then immediately begin planning the next survey, which we'll put in the field in October of 2020, and then continue for a year, and so on and so forth. So what are we collecting from this survey? We're collecting really a ton of data about who people are and how they're traveling. You can consider them in 5 buckets. We're collecting from households information about their size, the number of people who are workers, the number of students in those households, how many vehicles and what type of vehicle they own, their household income, and information about the places where they live, how much money they pay for rent or mortgage, the age of their house, how long they live there, etc. We collect information about their vehicles, characteristics of their vehicle, fuel type, whether it's an autonomous vehicle or not. Almost certainly not for everyone right now, but we expect that may change in the future, and whether they have a MnDOT transponder. On the person level, we're interested in as many demographic characteristics as we can get, including gender, race, age, etc. How often whether they're employed or not, whether they're a student or not, where they typically go to work, where they typically go to school, how many jobs they have. Some questions we ask them about their typical travel behavior, how they usually get to work, how they usually get to school, etc. We tacked on a question at this wave about people's interest in autonomous vehicles because it's a question that was floating around and still is at the time that we initially fielded this survey, and that's something that we can add a question or two every time we do a new wave. And then questions about where they work, how often they work, how many jobs they have, what industry they work in, and then critically, every trip that they make, what mode they traveled by, why they were making their trip, what time they did it, who was with them, were they traveling with other members of the household, who was traveling with whom, and if they paid for their trip, how much they paid. And to give a sense of the size of the survey, we're estimating the overall, in this first wave, we're trying to get data from 7,500 complete households. In future waves are going to be slightly smaller. We're going to be looking for 3,750 to 4,000 households to be participating in the survey over the course of the year. And this turns into a lot of travel. 7,500 households, we estimate make about 15,000 people who are going to participate in a week. Will give us 107,000 days of travel, make 400,000 trips going to, and we'll have GPS trace data for literally millions of records. So we're talking about a lot of data that we're able to work with, and the slide in front of you shows us where we are right now. In part, tells you the status. We've gone through about 75% of households at this point. We're right on schedule because it's about 3/4 of the way through our year. And then there are things that we learned from the study. So we're finding that people are not that people are participating for fewer days than would like, and the number of trips per day is a little more than we expected, and the number of locations per trip is about exactly what we expected. But we'll know far more when the survey is completed, and we'll issue a complete report on household travel in the spring, late spring of next year. So how does the survey work? If you are selected to be part of the survey, you receive an invitation in the mail. Just out of curiosity, has anybody here been a survey participant in this survey yet? Okay. It may yet happen. And certainly anyone who is interested is welcome to be we don't allow volunteers to the survey, but certainly if you're interested, we're happy to give you a link to try the survey out for yourself, and let me know if you're interested in that. But if you were selected to be a part of the survey, you'll receive and the way you're selected is what we call an address-based sample, which means that we have a list of all the addresses in the region, and we have, based on the geography, a probability that they're going to be selected. We select your address, and then we mail you a letter. The letter will give you a code that instructs you how to participate, and then over the course, and then you'll be mailed 2 reminders to participate after that. There's 2 ways you can participate. If everybody in your household has a smartphone, if all adults in your household have a smartphone, the preferred method is via smartphone data collection, which we call RMove, where you will participate entirely via carrying your smartphone with you and answering questions on the app that you download. We're seeing approximately 75% of households are participating with that method, which is exactly what we'd expected. There are households where not all adults have a smartphone, or where they don't want to participate in that method, and they're going to be able to participate through what we call our survey, which is a traditional household survey method, where they will be issued a diary for all of their trips for a single day, and then they will have the opportunity, either through a website, by being called through a call center, or by being called by a call center, to report all the trips that they took on their travel day. This is a much more onerous process, and so we only ask people to do that for 1 day. The beauty of the smartphone data collection is because it doesn't require to record as much information manually. People tend to be willing to participate for an entire week, which gives us a lot more information about travel variability and a lot more days of data overall. It's not as simple as that, of course. One of my favorite anecdotes about travel surveys from the 1950s is a report that from the 1950 version of the survey noted that in one sense, that non-response for the survey was something that they considered and found it to be negligible, and left it at that, and not an issue of concern. Times have changed substantially since the 1950s. People are answering surveys less and less, and so there are a number of strategies that we're taking to maximize participation, in particular with groups that we know that are difficult to reach through surveys of this type, because this is not an easy survey to take and demands participation for every member of the household. Large households are particularly difficult to reach at times, and then typical in the survey research industry, identified hard to reach groups include low-income households, zero-car households, and non-English speaking households. So there are 3 buckets of strategies that we are employing to ensure representation. One is oversampling. We have, in some cases, geographic knowledge of where particular hard-to-reach groups are, and have increased the sample rate in hard-to-reach blocks, in hard-to-reach geographies, which we define as areas where, how do I define those? I say things out loud, and then you have to say what they mean. I believe 90%, we define hard-to-reach blocks as those where they're in the 90th percentile. Sorry, they're in the 90th percentile of having low income or zero-car households, but I could be wrong about the details of that. But we have a higher sampling rate for those households. We have a very targeted outreach program to convey the importance of the survey to particular communities to encourage participation. And then we have also an engagement strategy that follows up with households that we've identified as more critical towards a representative sample to follow up after with additional reminders. So after you receive a survey, after you receive the invitation to the survey, you receive a reminder postcard. The reminder postcard would look like this if you received it, and this is the overall branding of the survey. And I'm going to show a quick a video of what participating in the survey is going to look like. I'm going to stand up so I can see this a little better when I talk about it. So you install the ARMove app on your smartphone if you participate with ARMove. And as you travel, well, first you enter your password, and which you get your invitation letters. And so then you just take it with you, and it runs in the background. And after a trip, you are invited to take a survey. And then you go into the app and take your survey. And it says, hey, you made a trip from this green dot to this red dot. Is that a correct trip? And then it asks you some very specific questions about your travel. It will say you can go into the trip and identify that that's a trip that you made, and it will ask you, why did you stop here? Like, I stopped there for appointment shopping errands. It will make the question more detailed. You enter that you went there for grocery shopping. So who traveled with you? And you say that one member of your household went and nobody else who wasn't from the household. At this point, you can click how you enter how you traveled. And another feature of the app is that it learns over time over the course of the week. And so if you have a lot of regular travel, what will happen is it will identify repeat or match trips, and it will pre-populate the answers for you so you don't have to enter information repeatedly. So if you go to the same place for work every single day, doing the survey is going to get easier and easier towards the week. Or if you travel with the same people every day, it will know that those people might be with you, and it allows you to, so in this case it guesses the details of your trip. It allows you to confirm or edit the details, and sometimes you do edit the details. And when I was testing out the survey, I took one of my children to a particular activity at one location on Wednesday, and the next day I went to the same location. I was dropping off another child, and so it guessed that I was taking the same trip again. I said no, I'm going to the same place, but I'm dropping off a different child, and it was a relatively easy thing to correct. So that shows what the app looks like. Again, the offer is out there if anybody is interested in participating to see what the experience is like. We're happy to make that available to you. Our outreach exists in 3 buckets as well. We have done some general outreach through the council's social media, through the council's website, through the press release, and earned media. My favorite earned media that we got was that we actually last winter reporter, an anchor for KSTP, I believe, actually received an invitation to the survey and decided since he was doing that, he might as well do a segment about that. And so we got some nice free media out of that, and through community newsletters and emails. On targeted outreach, we've targeted particular communities for social media and paid media social media and paid media ads, including, I believe, radio and newspaper ads, doing some outreach with community organizers and ambassadors. And then we're starting as well with populations and hard-to-reach groups that have not responded to the survey invitation to do some door-to-door outreach as well to convey the importance of the survey. Materials are also translated into 5 languages. Survey results from the first wave of the survey will be available in the spring next year, and we'll be presenting on the results at that time. And the next wave will begin again in the fall, and we'll be reaching out to and we'll be any changes we make, we'll be informing you about as well. And at this point, to be happy to stand for any questions about either the TBI program or the household survey.
All right, any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Could you share a little more about the types of demographics that are tracked, or is there a list? Did I list the demographics that are tracked specifically?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellis Ingebrigtsen, demographics that what?
Of what's the demographic information of the survey respondents that we track?
Oh, we track, Madam Chair, we track age, track gender, we track race, we track income. I think from a demographic perspective, that's what we have. Also, I believe educational attainment.
Income?
Yes, income.
Could you also share how is the information collected by the American Community Survey, the transportation portion, different from what we collect?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, the American Community Survey collects information about travel, but it's only about the commute. And so it asks you how you got to work on the day before the survey. Commute travel commute is the only type of travel that's represented in the American Community Survey, and is a very limited focus of all travel in general, both in this region and experience nationwide. We think that the commute represents about between 15 and 20% of overall travel, and so this survey is really aimed at getting at the other 80% of travel.
Perfect. Last question. So one thing I think it's you provided very thorough information and clearly a thorough approach in many ways. One thing that I think is important to kind of shift the narrative up, is in the use of hard to reach communities. They're hard to reach because we use methodologies that aren't appropriate, if that's fair to say. So for example, when we're talking about sending to home addresses, if we have a population that's more represented as a renter, they're not, it's not because they're not respondent. If our method is more designed for a homeowner versus a renter, if that makes sense. If we were designing it for someone who was renting, then it would work better for someone who's renting than possibly for homeowners. Another example is that if we're designing a methodology that relies on people being able to use written language or having the cultural practice of using a written language, then it's going to be more successful and easier, therefore, with people who use written language as a primary method of communication. Where we have populations who their language did not have a written format until they immigrated to the U.S. and they had a need for one. And so in those communities, if we used a methodology that respected the oral tradition, i.e. a phone survey, you'd have tons of success at ease with everyone, frankly, not just those communities. So I think it's important to talk about the method being culturally appropriate for the target audience, as opposed to the audience being hard to reach. And I would encourage the use of and consideration of the use of a phone survey that's more accessible. That's what, in my experience at Minneapolis Public Schools, when we have 160s, whatever, some crazy number of languages spoken. Mm-hmm. But even more importantly, when you get to the point where you have a language that didn't exist until 20 or 30 years ago in the written format, it's futile to do that. So using phone surveys was a way that it was easy for everyone to participate in. I realize the dynamics of this may not allow for that unless there was that piece of the use the diary kind of option, but I just encourage making sure that our methodology is culturally appropriate for all the people we're working with. Then it will work better. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair and presenter. I have a question about, I'm thinking about, like, when I get surveys, how do I respond? Some of them are pretty thick. I'm wondering if I would be more responsive if I saw a postcard and all I had to do was, take my phone and scan it, and then I could get access to the app. That might encourage me more so than to have to kind of look through, all the questions or, read all this stuff before I go to the site and sign up.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, and also to respond to the previous comment as well, both because I want to note that the point you made is very well taken, and we will, and both your point about language and the words hard to reach. There is one of the complexities of the survey of this type is we're trying to get a lot of very detailed information, and so the burdens that go along with that are complex. I think that we in the past had done surveys that were primarily phone-based and saw participation rates drop dramatically because of the need for very long phone interviews for large households that could be in excess of an hour for getting the information for a single day. So one of the things that we're trying to do over time is to make this survey involve as little effort as we possibly can. That's one of the reasons we moved to a GPS-based format, that some of the information that used to have to be laboriously tracked by hand and reported is now done by the smartphone, and only questions that we don't already essentially know the answers to are ones that we have to ask. And then the same thing with learning. The responses is a way to make taking the survey, which requires, again, a lot of information and frankly a lot of burden on the part of the household participating, to be able to do so with a minimum, with the minimum amount of effort that we can make. And your suggestion is also well taken, that having a scannable code or a QR code or a barcode that allows somebody to enter into the survey without having to go and download the app separately is a really great idea, and I will bring that in for our next wave as well. So thank you for that suggestion.
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, Jonathan, maybe you could talk about, we do know we're asking a lot from the survey takers. You could talk about maybe some of the incentives we have for those that encourage them to take that. That's helpful in getting them to take this too.
Yes, Madam Chair, we've in this survey, as well as in past surveys, we've offered monetary incentives to people to participate in the survey. I believe that currently the monetary incentive is $25 per person in the household for people who've participated in the survey. We realize that's a difficult survey to take, and we appreciate the effort that people put in and the households put in to provide their data to the region. And we are experimenting as well with varying those incentive rates to provide higher incentives to people who are less likely to be willing to provide information as well.
Okay, we have Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like I get a pretty good sense of the ingredients that go into this. I'm less clear about the final result. And I guess I'm interested to know, do we end up sort of assigning like a score to individuals, like Chris Fredson's transit ridership score on a scale of 0 to 100, and use that to guide decision making, or is it more general?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fredson, we anonymize the data once it comes into us as well, so we don't know your name or anything about you other than where you live, and we try to fuzz that a little bit. And so we're looking at average patterns overall, and so we can say that we can look at your household and say you made X number of trips, and we can compare it to somebody else's household and look at the amount of travel they made, and then we can categorize travel by geography, by demography. We can look and say that the households in this city travel more than households in that city. Households in this city travel longer distances than households in that city. lower income households are likely to make more trips for this purpose than higher income households, or vice versa. So it helps us understand who's traveling and for what reason, and to break that down by age, by income, by gender, by race, and both help us to understand what we're talking about when we talk about travel, and to make sure that our models and tools that we use to do analysis reflect the totality of travel as well.
Councilmember Fredson?
Just to follow up, so I feel like corporations have really figured out, modeling and scoring, and if you Google something, it turns into an ad within minutes, and even on elections, right? Like I feel like the political machine has kind of figured out, right, who's going to vote and how do we expect them to vote and all that stuff. And I'm curious to know is there data that we would find useful that we actually don't have access to, or are there really no limitations on the data that we have access to?
Madam Chair, Council Member, you'll have access to all the data as well, and all the dimensions of it we have access to help predict.
Oh, can I clarify? Yeah, I didn't mean we as a council. I meant we macro Met Council. Right. I'm wondering if there's been any limitations put on the amount and type of data that the council can collect in terms of helping or predict people's behavior.
I would say really no.
Okay.
It's subject to the amount of cost to collect the data.
Yep. Thank you.
Director Thompson, then.
I think, Madam Chair, members, I think one of the important parts is this is a foundation to help us look forward. Forecast, it's often you'll try to decide, well, what is this project and how big should it be and where should it go? I don't think this data set is unique in providing answers to that we couldn't buy this data about forecasting at the level we would need to make big decisions about should we build a light rail line, is this highway going to need more lanes? Who's going to use this transit system? It's a pretty unique data set compared to what else is used, but it takes in some other data sets.
And I'd add as well, there's two elements of ground truthing to decision making I think it adds. One of them is, again, looking at the totality as opposed to our own experiences as well, and our own desires as well. And so it will tell us how many people are driving as opposed to how many we wish were driving, how many people are taking transit as opposed to how many we wish would take a particular line. It grounds our forecast in patterns of existing behavior, and at the same time can help broaden our understanding of travel patterns. One graph I often show to audiences from our previous TVI is one that looks at travel by purpose by age and worker status. And you see that employed adults between 18 and 65, about 30 to 40% of their travel is commute, to address the previous question. But when you look at people who are not employed, very little of their travel is commute. When you look at people who are under 18, very little of their travel is commute. When you look at people who are over 65, very little of their travel is commute. And these might seem like very obvious points, but it's easy to get caught up in the importance of commute, especially when you're in a room full of people who are all structurally adult employed people between 18 and 25. And so it helps bring in data from a variety of sources to broaden our own perspectives and to make sure that we're really representing everybody's transportation choices and needs when we're doing analysis.
Okay. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you. And this is fascinating. I mean, I'm having a blast just listening to your presentation. So thank you very much. Just have a couple of questions and couple of comments. The first question that I have is, are we collecting, in addition to what usual users do or their actual behavior, what do they want? Any aspirational information from the users. I'll let you answer, and then I'll ask the other questions, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Council Member, we're asking some folks some questions about autonomous vehicles, but we're not asking a lot of questions about what people want, just in an effort to keep the number of questions we're asking down, although we certainly in future waves can ask targeted questions about what people want. But we're asking questions not just about their usual behavior, but about what they actually did the day that they were surveyed and the week that they were surveyed, in part because usage of the transportation system is composed of a lot of people's usual behavior and a lot of people's completely unusual behavior as well. And so we need to incorporate that in when we develop a transportation system too.
Good.
Good.
And another data point that I was thinking is, I know this is just about households, so I'm assuming it's just people who are residents in the region, but are we capturing somewhere else information from tourists or visitors?
Madam Chair, Council Member, yes, not as part of this survey because just the structure of the survey only allows us to sample people who live in the region, but we the special generator surveys listed in the program, as well as some of the purchase data, can help us get at the travel patterns of visitors as well.
Okay, thank you. Just briefly, just to follow up on the comments about from Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson about targeting specific communities and doing outreach that meets them where they are. Definitely, there's not only the communities that just have a written language in the last 30 years, but I know that there are many recent immigrants that do not have a written language at all. I met folks from Central America that do not speak English or Spanish. They are Maya speakers, and we have quite a number in Minneapolis public schools. So I know for a fact that they do not have a written language in their own, a written system of their own language. So there, for all practical purposes, there's no way of reaching them in a written fashion. So just follow up on that. I think that there's so many variables in that vein that I think we shouldn't be trying to reinvent the wheel. I know that there are many organizations and businesses and vendors out there locally that do have the skills to interact and gather information from those specific communities. So my suggestion would be to try and see if we can partner with those folks that are already doing the work instead of us trying to figure out how to reach multiple communities using multiple tools. I don't think we need to do that if there are folks that already have the skills out there. So that would be my suggestions. And my last point will be, I'm very interested in assisting in any way possible in this process. So I would like to somehow be involved in providing feedback on the type of questions that you're asking as you move forward with this survey. And in any other fashion that we can help you collect the information, I'm personally very interested in assisting in any way possible. So thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, if not, I have one question. So, so you talked a little bit about under 18 and that type of thing, but during your presentation at one point you were talking about the adults having the smartphones and being able to plug into the app. But I know I have teenagers and they travel differently than I do. So if it goes to a family, can the teenagers also have access, or does it have to be through the parents, or because they're more likely to do it if it's on their own?
Madam Chair, that's a good question and one that we wrestled with for a long time in planning the survey. Ultimately, the decision that we made was that only people over 18 would have the app, and that parents would record the travel for children living in the household. And teenagers are a particular difficult population to deal with, both because of enhanced privacy concerns with giving kids devices or having tracking kids, what consent means when kids are doing that, who's giving the consent, is it the kid, is it the parent? There are both privacy and legal issues along with that, as long as in the survey industry, concerns about the reliability of information that teenagers might provide. And so for a number of reasons, we said it makes sense to have parents enter information, although there is also a strong argument that do you actually know what the travel that your 15 or 16-year-old child is doing on a particular day, and should you? It's not an easy question, and we fell in the line of restricting the app itself to people over 18, but there are certainly arguments in both ways.
I would just be curious as we look at the data coming in, if that data is underreported, because there's a lot of, because they do travel, like especially like we've got our student season or passes, summer passes, and I know my kids travel by bike probably as much by car as anything and that kind of thing. So I would just be curious to see what the results look like and revisit it. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I love, thank you, Chair, the idea about asking aspirational questions, and I think it would really also help to point us in the direction of opportunity. I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made about people's travel behaviors and narratives that are shared. When I was at the city of Minneapolis, oftentimes we heard about the most likely person to bike or walk because of the American Community Survey, Transportation Survey. The conversation was often that white males, 35 to 65, were most likely to bike for transportation. That was the regular conversation. And a colleague of mine said one day, well, that's not what the American Community Survey says. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He'd been at all these meetings with me too, where this was talked about all the time. And he said, well, I was looking at the data the other day and it's not at all that. They're right on par with everybody else. And so we pulled the data, and sure enough, white males were no more likely than any other group to bike for commute. And in fact, our Hawaiian residents were most likely to bike and walk and commute in our state, and American Indians were much more likely to. And so then that got me questioning, well, where did this narrative come from? And it came from the bike industry, because the population that bought the most expensive bikes for biking to work was that population, although they were actually a little underrepresented as a part of the population that made up for trips. So I think it's just really helpful to understand that we may have an opportunity to counter some narratives about how people would like to, especially when we see walkability scores in communities much lower for people from low income communities or in communities of color compared to other spaces. And if we are able to say something like, 90% of people would prefer to be able to walk to destinations, that would go a long way towards supporting transit-oriented development work, but also countering narratives that certain people want to take this type of active commute versus other people, where we just kind of have these stereotypes or other types of desires for promoting a particular message.
Madam Chair, Council Member, well, thank you. And I'll note that the data does show that males are far more likely to be bicyclists than females, but it's not. Again, you're correct that by race and ethnicity, it matches up pretty well with overall race and ethnicity of the population as a whole. One similar thing that we learned looking at the TBI data from 10 years ago, we cooperated with the University of Minnesota in a study looking at demographic factors that influence transit use. And there was a perception that was true at one time that having children makes you less likely to take transit. And we found in 2010 that this actually wasn't true, that there was that actually people with children are more likely to take transit than people without children. And it's similar a similar result of countering particular narratives that or particular assumptions, both that either are not true or haven't been true for a long time, that potentially have real policy consequences. So I appreciate that, that's something you're thinking of, and we're going to try to provide as much of that as we can.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Oh, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all for a good discussion. So, with that, our business for the evening is done, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Any other discussion?